All right, so today we got Pieper and Odin. You read them head to head. So which one did you like better today? Pieper wins today, doesn't he? Our man, he came out on top. What's wrong with Odin? Trying to answer too many questions. That's part of it. Okay, that's certainly part of it. What else stood out to you when you were reading Odin?
Free will thing.
Yeah. He mentions this once or twice. Did you recognize how often this comes up? Now, what's going on with that? What's the deal here? Why? And this is kind of what we do at the end of class when we got time. But I want you to do this because this is important. This is part of your growing and systematic understanding. Okay? So I want you to kind of grasp and analyze what's going on here. Why is it such a big deal to Odin? What's going on? And is it a big deal? I mean, does he talk about this once in a while? Comes up frequently, right? And in the context of what? What's the point? What's Odin's concern here? All right, he's trying to balance off determinism versus responsibility. All right, and that's part of what's going on here. So he's trying to figure this out. And there are times when Odin seems to be really falling prey to the zero-sum game, doesn't it? Where he's kind of casting it as an either-or. So we got this, but we got to have this, and and he's trying to keep this thing worked out here. So that's a big thing for him. All right. The other big issue for Odin, frankly, is this for him is absolutely constitutive of his definition of human. For Odin, human equals free will. It's just a given. Now, you talk to your average Joe Schmo on the street, are they going to agree with Odin? Absolutely. This is a common assumption at work in the world, and it's been a common assumption for a long time, and everybody just assumes this. To be human is to have a free will. Duh. Freedom. Yeah, that makes you a human. You're a human, you got free will. Everybody knows that. And so for Odin, this is simply the definition of human being. To be a human is to have free will, and so for him, there's nothing to think about here. Any discussion about providence cannot mitigate free will, because then that would we would cease to be human and we would just be automatons, automata, and we can't have that. Can't have robots running around. We've got to have free will people. That's really important. Now, why is that so important to Odin beyond simply this definition, which is plenty? But there's even more. Think about his theological heritage. What is he? He's a Baptist. All right. There you go, as you might say. Now, and he's a particular kind of Baptist, obviously. There are those free will Baptists, and that's one he's part of. So this for him is not just something he's kind of interested in, he's tied to it. It's part of his heritage. And you also notice that when you're reading Odin and he starts to, he's got this penchant for putting all of his references right in the text, and you notice how it gets kind of thin when he starts doing his free will stuff. There's just not as much there. And the ones that are there are kind of be the same ones over and over again. Like John of Damascus keeps showing up. And, John, a little fuzzy there, but that's his baby. That's his guy. But he doesn't have much else because it gets a little thin. Frankly, it gets a lot thin. But for him, this is a central, got to have it. It's a sine qua non, without which it doesn't work to be a human being. So that's why he's fighting this thing all the time. Got to have it, got to have it, got to have it. All right. Now, what would be a Lutheran response to this? And this is just a real quick thing, because we're going to talk about this more next quarter when you actually read De Servo de Arbitrio, which is the bondage of the will. Can't wait. But anyway, that's next time around. What's the Lutheran understanding of free will? Maybe you know this, maybe you don't.
Free to be what it means to be human.
What's that?
You're free within the context of what it means to be human.
You're free within the context of what it means to be human. Okay, we're on the right track.
For earthly things.
Gerard? Oh, for earthly things. Okay, Adam adds this. That's correct, Gerard.
Is it that you're free, but also there are things that are a necessity, like you were saying, in humanity that you need to do? Like you're free to never eat if you want to, but you need to eat in order to...
All right, so there are certain things that we are contingent beings. This is absolutely true. In fact, this is just too much fun to let it ride. We'll talk about this a little bit. Even though you're going to hit it again next quarter, you might not have me doing it, so this is just too much fun. In fact, Luther, in Bondage of the Will, essentially asserts that man does not have free will. Doesn't have any. In fact, that's what the whole point, the bound will. A bound will. Now, you might say, yes, that's true. Because of the sinful fall, we are bound, which is his point. We are bound to do evil. Man doesn't have the freedom to choose right. Man doesn't have the freedom to look at two options and say, which one do I want to do? He is bound to do the evil one. Bound. No free will. So essentially, you put it in a nutshell, Lutheran teaching is man does not have free will. And this is kind of a struggle when you first hear this, because you have been raised your whole life to think, well, yeah, free will, got to have it. It's kind of an important thing. And then you hear this, no, there's no free will, because you're bound. And see, I'm going to go even further. And the more I've studied this, the more I thought about it, the further you go on this road. Because I'm now ready to assert that humans are never free. In fact, even Adam and Eve were not free. And this becomes the critical thing for people. People say, well, you know, the reason the fall happened is because God had to create people with free will, and he had to take that risk, because that's what it meant to be human, and look what happened. And now we don't have a free will anymore, but Adam did. I'd say, no, Adam didn't have a free will. Because when Adam was created and put in the garden, what was he doing? He was doing what God had given him to do. Because he wanted to, because he was a human, doing what he'd been put there to do, but his will was aligned with God's will. It was in sync with God's will. The fact that he chooses to sin isn't an exercise of his free will, it's a violation of his humanity. Now, we'll talk about this more with Bonhoeffer, so I don't need to unpack this a ton, but even Adam fits into this. And so even the redeemed, do you have a free will now that you're redeemed? Are you restored? Now you get your free will back? Now what do you have? Well, no. What does Paul say? You're a slave to Christ. So you're not even free now. You never will be. Dylan was right. Got to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. You guys know that one? Oh, come on. Bob Dylan, got to serve somebody? Anybody know that one? You guys break my heart. Bob Dylan had 3 Christian albums. One of them was Saved, and on that one, oh no, it's on, it's actually on, I think it's on Slow Train Coming, got to serve somebody. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, you got to serve somebody. And then John Lennon was incensed by that, and he wrote a song, Serve Yourself. Yeah, there you go, Joel.
Can we find Bob Dylan in the Lutheran hymnal, though?
Well, probably should. He wrote some actually very good lyrics. You know, he did. His Christian records, you should take a look, listen to them. They're pretty impressive. Pretty good stuff. All right. What's that?
If you can understand what he's saying.
Oh, it's not hard. Bob's easy compared to some people. All right. Anyway, so you're not ever free. You're a slave. Slave to sin, slave to Christ, whatever. That's just the way we are as human beings. And this just really chafes at people. They don't like this. But that's the bottom line. So Odin is just going nuts trying to defend this, whereas a Lutheran would say, what are you talking about? Free will? Well, it's no big deal. And see, I'm willing to go even further, because I would contend that even in the things below, like, should I wear deodorant today? Or, you know, what color shirt do I want to wear today? And do I want to get married or not? Do we have free will in those things? Not nearly what we think we do. In fact, I'm more and more convinced that most of what we think is our free will is pretty much illusion. I'm seriously, because I'm willing to say that most of us are living lives that are pretty much set. For my example, can you guys live anywhere you want in America?
No.
Theoretically, well, I can do what I want. I'm in America. I can live anywhere I want, have any job I want, do whatever I want. Really? Can you live in Ladue? I couldn't live in Ladue. No way. I don't have the finances for that. I can't pull that off. Ladue's a rich neighborhood down the road if you didn't know that. I can't live there. Can I drive a Rolls Royce? No, I cannot. I can't afford it. Can't do it. There's all kinds of things I can't do. And even when you get married, I'm willing to bet that most of you think back to, why did I get married? You don't know. There's never one time in your life when you say, I just decided I would get married. It just kind of happened to you. You had this girl who showed up and she kind of liked you, and before you know it, you're out with her, and then, well, I guess I should get married. All right, let's do it. Now you've got kids, and how did it all happen? You know what I mean? No. And here you are. These things happen. Now, and it sounds kind of funny, but if you're honest, you'll realize there's a lot of truth to this. We live in these complex networks of obligation and responsibility, and we live right along with them, but we just get pulled along with these things, and away we go. And this notion of free will is way overplayed. It's really an illusion.
Can you just define what exactly you mean by free?
Yeah, well, that's a big part of this too.
It seems like there's a couple of different.
No, you're right.
definitions at work.
No, there are several things going to work here. I would suggest that Odin really wants to hold that we have an autonomously free will. We have an option before us, and we can choose A or B, and it's fully within our range to do that, to do good or do evil. It's our choice. That's the key to a free will Arminian. That's a critical thing. And I would say no. And there's an appreciable difference between the contingency we have. Now, the critical thing here is this. While I will deny free will, I will never deny human responsibility and human accountability. And that's why we have to be very careful about the zero-sum game. Because even though we have a God who is absolutely in control and everything is going according to his purpose, the whole point of providence, well, we'll get there yet, that does not ever negate human culpability, human responsibility. So, go ahead.
Well, I'm wondering, I mean, the claim that we have complete autonomy to pick A or B without being determined by any outside source. No, very few people would actually put it in that language.
Yeah.
They'd say that we have influences, cultural, whatever, we have things which compel us.
Right.
But that in some way or another, there is causal efficacy to our will.
There
That
is.
is not
Sure.
attributable to any outside
That's
source.
right. And that is true in the sense of this story that we're living in. And then, of course, parallel to that story, you know, the whole Pieper thing, is God's purpose is being accomplished, and they both hold together. No zero-sum game. So you're right. There is, and so that's why I'm kind of going from what I would say responsibility or accountability. I can make choices, and there are outcomes that come from those choices. And people suffer or people benefit from the choices I make. And that's absolutely the case. But in another sense, I'm not free in those choices in one very profound sense, but in another sense, I am and I'm accountable. So then someday at the judgment seat, God can say, you did this and this and this. And I can't say, I didn't have a free will. I'll say, so what? You did it anyway, and you're accountable. Okay? All right, good? Yes, Jeff.
So, is there a difference now between like a positive free will and a negative free will?
Traditional Lutheran systematics will kind of talk that way. We'll say we don't have a positive free will, we can't choose to do the right, we can only choose to do evil. So we have kind of a half free will. Fair enough. But I think, see, it's even more of kind of the profound, brutal thing to say, let's just get over this free will thing. Because when people are trying to defend free will, what are they really trying to defend? Why does it matter so much to them? And it really starts to smell like the theologian of glory who's trying to save some vestige for human dignity, some shred of something's good in human. At least I've got a free will. No, you don't even have that. Okay? Stephanie.
So how is what you're saying not a robot?
That's the big challenge, isn't it? Because it starts to sound like everything's just fixed. And that's where we have this huge tension that must always endure through everything we're doing between God is absolutely in control and things are happening according to his plan and this is his work being carried out, and we are absolutely responsible human beings. And they seem to be completely antithetical to each other, and yet they both have to hold on. And so that's what I was trying to get at with Nathan, that even though I would say my will is not free, I'm still responsible. I'm still responsible. And even in our own experience, psychologically, we have the sense of being free to do what we want to do. And that sense of guilt, that conscience, which kicks in when we violate what we're supposed to do. So we have that sense of, I am accountable, and I know it. I get that. I don't have the sense that, just forced into it, what could I do? So while it's true that God is completely in control, it's also true that we are responsible, discrete, individual human beings who are held accountable for our actions. So we're not robots. But on the other hand, it's all happening according to God's plan. Now, the big thing to realize here is, and maybe this is why we are so reluctant to talk about providence, the big thing to realize is that God's providence, his purposeful working all things to the end. This telos we talked about last time, this is absolutely happening, and everything's going according to his plan. That never negates my role and my responsibility and what I'm doing. And when it comes to real life living, how much do we think about God's providential plan? Not very much. It's not that big a deal. Hear me right, okay? Kind of is a big deal, but kind of not. And when I'm counseling people on their marriage or on their child rearing or on their finances, I don't usually talk about, this is all happening according to God's set plan, it's all okay. Usually what I talk about is they have a responsibility, they need to make sure what they're doing. So we live our lives in the reality of this world with all of our contingent responsibilities, and that's how we function. We're not robots. And yet, on the other hand, everything is happening exactly as God always intended it and exactly according to his plan, which is mind-boggling, but that's what we got to confess. Because if we can't confess that, we end up with a God that is not omnipotent or not omniscient, and can't have that either. Pieper's point.
Okay. I feel like I'm just not understanding, I guess, because I'm very confused still.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Since God is in control of everything,
Yes.
But humans have responsibility, how is that not like Pelagianism, where like God, how are we out of the zero-sum game?
Well, that's exactly the point, though. It becomes Pelagian if we're playing a zero-sum game. If we recognize we simply have these kind of two parallel realities, which are both fully in force and fully happening. One is the world in which we live, in which we're accountable and responsible. The other one is the world in which God has created everything, and He's not even part of the world, and everything is happening exactly as He always planned this creation to play out. He is the supreme artist, and we are His artwork, and it's all happening exactly as He wanted. So which one's true? They both are completely, fully true, and they impinge on each other because God is clearly at work as this is unfolding, and yet in the unfolding, we are fully responsible, accountable human beings doing the things that we want to do, and yet because of our broken nature, unable to ever fulfill what God's purposes are, and so that's why He must redeem and restore us, but even then we're restored to His purposes, living according to His plan, always, 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 always. And so the confusion comes because we have these two mutually contradictory realities that have to stand next to each other even though they are inherently mutually contradictory. That's where the confusion comes. And as soon as you try to reconcile them in some way, you're immediately confused, and the only solution is to end up in error one way or the other. So you have to just back off and just say, I've got to hold on to this. The confusion I recognize, but the confusion is healed in the sense of trusting that God knows what He's doing, and I know what my responsibilities are, and I'm going to focus on those two things and get busy doing them. And don't worry about the reconciliation. Does that help?
Yeah.
All right. Brian.
One of my frustrations with Pieper, and then kind of what I'm hearing from you, is just when you're talking about responsibility, it almost seems to like empty what I've learned about what the word responsibility means. Because responsibility generally does mean some culpability, which also means some sort of you shouldn't have done this.
Right.
Shouldn't implies some sort of, well, you had a choice, one
Right.
or the other.
Yeah, it
And
seems to, yeah.
I understand the bondage of the will, and I understand even us being bound inside culture and blah, 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 makes sense. But I mean, if we're going to try to use the word just like throughout the word responsibility, just to have that there, but it's kind of emptied of what.
But see, it's not emptied. What it is, it's filled with the full understanding of what it means. Just take a look, and Scripture's clear on this. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ and give an account of what we've done in the flesh. Responsible. And yet, the same Scripture says, there's no one who does right, not one. And in fact, you can't. You're spiritually dead. No one can accomplish what God wants them to do. We're all equally broken. So, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. How can God hold me accountable for what I can't do? And see, what we're getting caught into is the standard philosophical fallacy of the ought implies can. And so if I ought to do something, it means I can do it. But that doesn't mean it at all. There's one of those times where God says, you must, and there's no way we can do it. And yet God says, you must. And we can say, that's not fair. And God will say, who are you talking about fair? I'm God, you're not. Shut up. You must do this, but I can't. Right, so receive my grace. There's a solution, it's Christ. And short that, you're up the creek because you're accountable for that. And fail to do it, you're going to pay the price. And you might say, that's not fair. Well, take that up with the judge. He decides what's fair. So the biggest issue is our assumption that responsibility means ability to do. Ought implies can.
I don't know, especially when we were in Confessions, Cole was very big on the bondage of the will isn't how he likes to translate it. It's more like unbound choice. This idea that, we have a free will and we have the ability to use it, we just necessarily use
Sure.
it.
As human beings, we live as responsible creatures who are agents of our own behavior, and we're held accountable for that. Sure. And yet, within the grand scheme, bound. And even more bound within the God's plan.
What's
Okay.
the grand scheme?
Was the grand scheme before God or before?
No, the whole
man?
God story, the economy.
That's what I feel like we're dissolving right now. We're dissolving the distinction between coram Deo and coram mundo, which we all learned in Lutheran mind. And so, while we might all be on board with coram Deo, we're bound, sure.
Yes.
It seems like you're saying more than that. And
I'm saying even a little more than that. I'm saying even in coram mundo, we're bound a lot more than we realize, even coram mundo.
Right, but are we ultimately and completely bound such that then I don't see how we get away from what Stephanie's saying, which is that coram mundo, we are just puppets.
Right, and so that's why I'm saying ultimately it might appear that way if you try to resolve the coram Deo and the coram mundo realities. Don't resolve them. Just let them be. Just let them be.
We all know that song.
Yeah. Joel.
So, it seems like what you're getting at then, I'm just trying to say this for clarification. you're saying that it's a matter of kind of who we're serving. We're bound either way. But, because I mean, it seems like, you know, reading throughout the Bible, there's chances where like the Israelites reject God.
Sure.
And he says, okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
But
Right.
so then in a sense they end up serving other foreign kings or okay. So
Right.
it's a
So
matter-
coram mundo, they're making a choice. We're not going to worship Yahweh. We're going to worship Baal instead. So do they pay the price for that? Yes. Does God hold them accountable? Yes. But was that choice to reject Yahweh all within the plan? Yes. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I mean, you have to say that. That's the point that Plaker's trying to make. You have to say that ultimately. And Pieper is, he's just twisting, trying to keep this thing all straight. And you can make the distinctions, but as Pieper himself recognizes, ultimately they're not satisfying. You can make the systematic distinctions. You can say this is this, but not that. And you say, okay, I get that, but it's not satisfying. The confusion reigns, or the, wait a minute, something's not quite right. It seems kind of fishy here. And that's true. It's true. It will always end up feeling like that. Tim?
Well, what you just said about Israel rejecting God's plan, then that leads into Odin, because he's got to try to explain it all, why there's got to be a plan B.
Right, which, yeah, that's why I was kind of ridiculing that. Because Odin, if you got free will, then God's got to just say, okay, let's see what happens. And, oh, they did that? Okay, plan B into action. All right, oh, they did that. Oh, plan C into action. You know, it's just kind of nuts, because if you think about it, where are we now? Plan Z to the, what, 10 billionth? Come on. How many contingent? Yeah, right. That's right. Which is what open theism teaches, and he's getting close to this, and it gets kind of nutty, because what we have to confess is what's happening is the plan, and there's one plan, and God had that plan before He created, and it included everything that's gone down just the way it's gone down, which is mind-bogglingly difficult. But that's what we've got to confess, because anything less, you end up with a God who's reacting and trying to pick up the pieces. Well, they did that. Ooh, okay, I'll do this real quick. No. Ryan.
I've heard kind of the two classical arguments that challenge this a little bit is, and I'm just curious how you respond. One, that to say that God couldn't create willing agents in and of itself would actually imply that God is not all-powerful.
No, I'm not saying he can't do that. I'm saying we're about as willing as we can be, but I'm saying we're still within the plan. Okay. What's your other one?
What was the other one? Oh, and the fact that we have a perception of willingness. Why would God create a perception of willingness if it wasn't actually willing?
But see, it is real. It's a real willingness that you do within this life.
Okay, so then I understand the tension, but it always seems like while Lutherans tend to play the tension, they always come down more on the sovereignty side than on the will side.
This is always the problem with any tension, and this is not the last time you're going to encounter these. Okay, they are everywhere. In good theology, they're everywhere. And so the attention is attention. And if you're going to keep it right, you've got to keep it in balance. And you know, this is even from the world of the physical world. Keeping attention is tough. You slide it one way or the other, and it's hard to keep that balance. It's tough. And most of us, frankly, get uncomfortable living in the tension. It doesn't feel good. And so we tend to resolve the tensions one way or the other, just because it gets easier to function. And you're right. And as Lutherans, we tend to resolve that on the side of God. God wins most of our tensions. You know, that's how we go. And go the other direction. But the reality is, the tension is the right answer, which just holds you there.
But this is what gets me uncomfortable, is we say, well, God wins the ties, but I don't just look at the doctrine of, sovereignty as being God. I also look at the doctrine of human will as also being God.
I agree. That's why
we come down on one side or the
we
other.
shouldn't ever come down on one side or the
But
other.
that's what gets me frustrated when I hear these Lutherans that are all, when they're summing up their argument, they're saying no free will. Because that's not living in the tension.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
That's all.
But see, and the reason, but I'll keep on saying no free will, just because I believe that how most people understand free will doesn't exist.
Well, some like autonomous thing above us that we kind of like.
I get to choose. God's offering me options. What am I going to do? Got to wait and see. I don't buy that.
No,
Yeah. All right, Mike.
To Ryan's point, a fair one, but keep in mind that American culture so rushes towards free will.
Yes.
You almost have to come out on the God side just to push back on culture. In Indonesia, where I worked for 4 years, Allah is totally sovereign if Allah wills all things. Now, in that culture, you might want to push the other direction.
All right. This is well said. And this maybe sheds some light on where I'm coming from. I would believe it is important to know your context and to compensate accordingly. So this is exactly right. If I'm living in an American autonomous individual culture, I'm going to push hard on the deterministic side. But if you're living in a culture that's hard on the deterministic side, well, you got to bring that to the other side. So you got to kind of, in a sense, get the tension right, you got to push back. And I guess I'm partly that way just by nature. You know, I always push against my culture. I'm just contentious that way. But you know, I'm probably it's true. If you put me in a bunch of liberals, I'll be super conservative. Put me in a bunch of conservatives, I'll be liberal just for the fun of it, and just to push back. Come on, guys, no way. You know, so yeah, there's ways, and it's part of that. I think the desire to keep the tension alive, and that's well said, Ryan.
Yeah, I don't know. That just, I feel like we in Lutheran circles though tend to try to push it to one side. I can understand the American context and wanting to push that way, but for example, if you're going to say, well, our social context and our family and our socioeconomical status completely determines us, you're also kind of, you know, pushing God aside. Like, you can't really make someone who could will and move inside of those constraints. That's also limiting God, isn't it?
No, God can. We have freedom within those things to a point. I'm just saying.
Sure.
As Americans, we kid ourselves into thinking we have this freedom. It's way overblown.
So you're just overblowing it to mess with our Americanism?
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, I always want to deconstruct your Americanism.
No,
As best, any way I can, I'll do that. No, and I'm serious about that, because I'm more and more convinced that if you're going to be a good Christian, you're going to be a bad American. You hadn't heard that one yet? Yeah. It's true. Stephanie.
Just double predestination. I guess how does that fit in still? Because
This is a big issue here, because all this is just dancing around the crux theologorum, which is what this is all about. And that's really next quarter when we hit the whole soteriology thing. But that's kind of what's going on here. And the reason we would deny double predestination is because that's solving the tension. That's the whole problem with it. And Calvinists get all excited about Luther, and they love bondage of the will. In fact, most of the translations we have are done by Calvinists. They think it's just great. And what they fail to realize is, yeah, Luther's going all the way right up to that point, but he won't cross that last step, which Calvin takes, and even more Beza takes, and says, got to finish it, got to be logical. And Luther would say, no, wait, logic doesn't work here. God wants all to be saved. Does he really? Yes, he does really. And yet, they aren't all. So what's with that? And Calvin says, well, the reason is because God has a secret will, and that secret will, your double predestination. Some for hell, some for heaven, done deal. And so Calvin solves the equation. Luther won't. He lives in the tension. He'll back off and say, how this can be that we have God wants all to be saved, and man is responsible and accountable, and man has these responsibilities, and yet God is choosing, and God alone chooses us and elects us. How can you hold those together? I don't know. I won't solve it. Calvin solves it. Arminius solves it. Luther refuses to solve it. And that's the difference. And even Lutherans have a tendency to solve it one way or the other. And most Lutherans, probably in an American context, solve it for the Arminian side, because that's our context. But others will solve it for the Calvinist side because they know better. But anytime you solve it, you're wrong. You cool with that, Ryan? All right. Good. I'm glad we're all cool now.
I just don't like it when someone pushes back just for the sake of pushing back.
Well, you got to learn to live with that, Ryan. And that's where the learning comes in. That's where, you know, that's just look at Luther's example. I mean, good grief, did Luther ever push back just to push back? Why do you think he says the radical things he's saying in the bondage of the will? He's saying it because Erasmus said the opposite side. So Erasmus says this, well, I'll show you, Erasmus. Boom, and he'll say that.
If he had said it nicer, there might be a whole lot more Lutherans, though.
If he said what?
If he had said it nicer, there might be a whole lot more
Oh,
Lutherans.
well, I don't know if that's the case. That's just a smokescreen. All right. 483 in Pieper. Let's do Pieper first, and if we have time, we'll do Odin. See how this goes. All right, so we're talking about providence. City in Rhode Island, named by Puritans. And so we all know what providence is all about. It's one of these Calvinistic doctrines. And yet, do we believe in it? Absolutely. And I really do think this is one of these doctrines that maybe we talk about too little. And Odin is quite right, and I'll throw Odin in here when I want to once in a while. Odin is quite right when he says providence is really nothing more than just an aspect of God's economy. And I think that's right on the money. And this helps to tie it into everything we've been doing so far this quarter. The whole idea of the economia, God's plan. Well, what's the whole point? God conceives his creation, creates, And then the creation is broken and fallen, so God redeems and restores, and then he brings it to consummation. It's all happening according to his plan. And will it end the way God has planned it? Yes. And the game is decided. The fix is in. Games are all done. Tonight, you don't have to play it. It's already fixed. Everybody knows it's going to happen the way it's going to happen. You might say, whoa, now see, think about that for a minute. Uh-oh, robots. We're just doing what we have to do. But that's ultimately what you have to confess, because it will end when God wants it to end, the way he wants it to end. Everything's come out exactly as he's planned it from the very beginning. Christ was to come and suffer and die and rise from the very beginning. It was always the plan, which of course has to mean that even the fall in the Garden of Eden was the plan. And now it gets really hairy. All right? And that's why in the Middle Ages they even had collects that would say, thank you, God, for the blessed fall. I think I've mentioned that before. Whoa.
Are you intentionally using differences between will and plan? Or would you say it's God's will?
Now, God's will is what he accomplishes, and his will and his ability to accomplish it are all kind of rolled together. So not much difference. Antecedent plan, antecedent will. All right. Okay. Now, so providence comes from two Latin words here. So we have pro, and then the Latin root is videre. And videre means what? To see. Yes, to see. Standard conjugating verb in Latin. That's why everybody knows this one. All right. And in fact, we get an English word from that. Yeah, video, of course. Yeah, video. You see your video. So video comes from videre, to see. So providere means to see before, or to see, oversee, to see about something. And in fact, the Romans would use see much how we do, to see visually and also to see to something and see that it happens, to oversee it. So they had that same kind of sense of this. So providence means to see to things and to oversee them. Providence is a part of the doctrine of creation, because not only does God bring creation into existence, but then he watches over it. And of course we're doing this backwards. Pieper takes creation first, then providence, which makes sense, but creation is a whole other topic in its own, and so we'll go from the God stuff to the creation stuff, and providence makes a nice bridge between them here, because providence is God's caring for this creation that he has made and watching over it. So they go together. God doesn't simply create and then stand back. He's actively involved. And this is very important. Luther picks up on this, 483 midst of the page. Luther expounds Genesis 2. The Sabbath, or the rest of the Sabbath, means that God so rested that he did not design to create another heaven and another earth. It does not mean that God ceased to preserve and govern the heaven and the earth which he had created. So God's still watching. There's a creatio continua. He's still involved. He's still creating. He's still working. He's still making these things happen, and he's directing them. And so every act of creation or every act of new life, God is directing this and making it happen. And we don't have to get hung up on whether God's creating the soul at that moment or that it's happening through human means. That's not a big deal. But the point is, God is still directing these things. I had somebody in my parish who actually was of the opinion that God had created the whole number of people who would ever be born on day 6. And then you have these little embryos waiting in heaven to get born. And so they had a big family because they were trying to get some of those babies out of heaven and get them born. Yeah, like, whoa, okay, no, this is not true. There's not like babies waiting to get born up there. God is creating as children are conceived. God is the one who is bringing this about. It's God's work. So the creation is continuing on. God is watching over this. It's an ongoing process of his care for this creation and his love for this creation. Now, this is also needs to be contrasted with the teachings of deism. And this is an important term, which we're going to be dealing with as we talk about creation more. And we've already encountered these to some extent because this clearly plays into providence as well. Deists, and let's just try to get this clear here, because these words get used quite a bit, and you should be conversant in the distinctions. A theist and a deist are two different things, but there's some overlap. All right. A theist is coming from the Greek word theos, God. So a theist is anybody who believes in God of any kind. If I confess God, I'm a theist. So a Muslim is a theist, a Jew is a theist, a Christian is a theist. And some Hindus are theists. Some aren't. Some are. And so if you confess a belief in God, you are a theist because I believe in God. Aristotle would count as a theist. Even though his God is just the unmoved mover, impersonal, it's still a God, and so you're a theist. All right, so theist is an all-encompassing term. Theist does not equal Christian, but Christians are theists. All right, so think about your Venn diagram. You got this big thing called theism, and inside it lots of examples. Deism is an example of a theism. So deists believe in God, but now they're taking this from the Latin root, deus, for God, and a deist believes that God is restricted in his activities with the creation. He creates, he establishes the rules and the laws, and he holds us accountable and will judge us at the end, but in between, he just kind of stands back and lets it run. So it's like an artist who makes a mobile, hangs it, and just watches the wind blow. Just see what happens. So a deist would say God does not intervene, does not listen to prayer or answer prayer in any kind of appreciable way, and he's just kind of letting things roll. That's what deism believes. So what would a deist think about the idea of providence? No way. You know, God set the ball rolling, but now it's rolling. And how it happens. So he's not continually tweaking it and guiding it and stuff. When we confess providence, we believe that God is continually guiding and directing the affairs of men. So kingdoms rise and kingdoms fall according to his plan, his direction, his choice. And so when he deigns it, it happens. When kings are kings, it's because God wants them to be kings. This is part of what we confess with providence. All right. Deists would reject that altogether. Okay, so this is page 484 then. Luther quote, first paragraph, we Christians know that creating and preserving is one and the same thing with God. Exactly. He's always doing this. It's an ongoing thing. And we also note, as we would expect from Pieper, bottom of 484, that when God is doing this work, it's one of these Augustinian axiom moments where we have the opera divina ad extra. So obviously providence is a work of all of the Godhead. All three persons are involved in providence all the time. All right, so we've got that, no problem. Then 485, top of the page, Pieper makes this interesting kind of offhand comment, which is really fascinating. And I want you to get your minds around this, because this is something Plaker had said. This is about 7 lines down from the top of the page. Divine providence centers in the church. Scripture teaches expressly that all things and all occurrences in heaven and on earth must serve the church. Now think about that. People don't operate this way, do they? We operate with the idea that the world is what's really important. Governments and politics and economics, that's the big important stuff. Just watch the news and you find out what's important. You know, who's ruling this, who's doing that. That's the important stuff. And then the church fits into that somehow and serves it and does its little part, which is where does church news get put? At the end, human interest story, unless Francis says that gays are cool, then it gets top of the line. But otherwise, it's just human interest buried at the bottom. Or unless we got some bishop of bling who's embarrassing the church, we'll talk about him too. But the church actually doing substantive things that matter? No, that doesn't matter. It's not significant. It's just human interest. It's peripheral. And yet here we have Pieper making this assertion that the world and everything that's going on in the world is serving the church, whether the world knows it or not, or whether the church knows it or not. And see, the really infuriating thing to me is not that the world disses the church. I expect that. What drives me nuts is when the church disses the church. And when people in the church act like the church is no big deal. Or act like we're trying to serve the world. Or we've got to try to figure out where we fit in the world. Or try to find our place in the world. Or try to justify ourselves in the world. Or try to make room for ourselves in the world. Or try to make ourselves attractive to the world. Or try to make the world notice and care about us. Any of that sound familiar? Yeah. Sounds way too familiar. Because church councils and church elders boards get really worried about that stuff. And it's completely backwards. We've got to get a little more courage here and a little more guts to realize we're the church. We are the body of Christ. We are the people of God. We're the thing that matters. We're where God's doing his real work. Stanley Hauerwas says the same thing. And it's always remarkable when Pieper and Hauerwas agree. You got to know something that's cool is happening. You guys don't know much about Hauerwas yet. You'll learn more about him before you're done here. But he's not like Pieper. We can say that. But he makes the same claim. And in fact, Hauerwas goes so far, which is really remarkable, because he makes the assertion that the most important thing that the church can do for the sake of the world is to celebrate the Lord's Supper, which is profoundly beautiful and wise. Because when we celebrate the Lord's Supper, what we're doing is we're declaring the truth of Christ. and we're doing the one thing that matters most. We're incarnating Christ in this world and carrying out his story and bringing it forward. That's what we're doing. And that's how the church makes the biggest impact in the world. Not by going out and holding political rallies or by trying to influence how they vote or by trying to get the right guys elected. That's all pathetically peripheral, stupid stuff. What matters is, are we being the body of Christ? Hauerwas is right on the money here. And Pieper's saying the same kind of thing. It's kind of cool. Kind of cool. All right, let's chew on that a little bit. A little side note, but it's something I think really important. All right, now Pieper gets into the objections that are raised against providence, and he talks about some of the things that get in the way. And even have this one concern, he brings up Jerome here about the problem that, maybe God's just not really worried about little stuff. Like, gnats, swarms of gnats, he doesn't care. And Pieper comes right after him, rightly so. And this is really good, I think. So Pieper writes at the bottom of 485, it starts with this: Jerome was nodding here, as has happened to him on other occasions. So in other words, he's nodding off and not paying attention. But who are we to pass harsh judgment on him? He only expressed in words the thoughts which we only too often harbor in our hearts. God's not paying attention. He's too busy. Our natural God-estranged mind does not realize that God provides for us as children. The Savior needs to remind us continually, take no thought for your life, O ye of little faith. The very hairs of your head are all numbered. The entire question, whether divine providence extends even to the minutest creatures, the church fathers and Orthodox theologians settled with the scriptural axiom: if it was not unworthy of and improper for God to create even the minutest creatures, much less can it be improper for him to rule what he created. So does God care when the mouse gets eaten by the hawk? Does he notice? Yes. Yes. Nothing is lost to him. Nothing is lost to him. And you say, wow, how can he handle all that? He's God, remember? He can handle it all. He's God. Trillions of events, he can handle it. All right, next big discussion is the whole secondary causes. And we've handled this extensively already because Pieper did this for us. And we don't need to do much more of it, but here we have the same thing going here, the idea of the secondary causes. So when God feeds you through the work of the farmer and the work of your parents, getting you the food, or the work of the people who are preparing the food, or your job that gets you money to buy it, and you are eating your meal, has God given you this meal? Yes. Yes. Just as certainly as if a hand reached down out of heaven with a plate of, pizza on it and said, here you go, here's supper. Ryan.
Before we move on to the secondary causes, I was wondering, I tracked down the Matthew 24 reference while I was reading for it was basically his support for everything and the world solely exists for the church.
Oh, yeah.
And that did not seem to line up with the reference. I'm just curious.
Yeah, don't get too hung up on Pieper's proof text thing.
Well, because, there are other reasons I'm curious about that, because, if God just was only about the church and the sacraments and this and that,
Well, but wait. It's not that the world doesn't matter to God. The whole creation matters to him, but the whole point is that creation is being redeemed and restored through the work of the church. And so in other words, what Pieper is not saying here is that all that matters is us everybody else going to hell in a handbasket. That's not the point. The point is that world, which is broken and rebelling against God, is being saved by what's going on in the church. And that's its only hope. That's what he's getting at. Okay? Okay. And on the proof text of Pieper, we haven't talked much about this, but he does this. He has a real strong tendency to kind of just like list off verses, and sometimes the context is less than flattering, but he'll use them anyway. And you shouldn't do that. Do as he says, not as he does. All right. Good. So, secondary causes, God works through means. And Pieper points out very nicely that God always works through means. He works through means in the world around us, and he works through means even in the church. Means of grace. This is how God does it. He doesn't just dump faith into you. He works through means. Systems 3 in the springtime. So, this is God's way of doing things. And it's also important to recognize then, on 488, when we have this point, that the operation of God and the operation of second causes, first full paragraph, are not two actions, but one numerical action. This one operation must not be divided in extent as though God performed one half and the secondary cause the other half. Sound familiar? Right. This is what Pieper was saying. And isn't it so cool when you see Pieper and Pieper lining up? And now you see what I meant when I said that essentially we're all just living fossils. And here's Plaker going back to discover the pre-moderns, and we're just living the pre-modern world all right now concurrently. And that's why we line up so much, because what he's embracing, we're still saying. People were saying it, we still say it. All right, good. Then we have this point on page 489, right before the point 3 page break. The so-called laws of nature are not something which differs from God's will in operation, but are God's will in operation itself in its relation to the existence and operation of the creatures. Right on, Pieper. I mean, right on. So what he's saying is this, that everything that God wills that directs the creation is coming from God's purposes for this creation, and it's the way it is because God has put it there. So what this means then is there's really no appreciable difference between the law of gravity and the law of motion, action and reaction, laws of thermodynamics, and the laws don't commit adultery, don't kill, honor your father and mother. They're all the same. They're all wired into the universe because God put them there, and they're just the way they are. It's because God has willed it that way. They're just the laws of how things are. And that's what I always mean when I talk about natural law. Natural law is simply what God has built into the universe. It's hardwired into things, and it's the way things work. It's the way it is. You think about it, it's kind of helpful this way. So why is it that gravity works? God put it that way. He willed it. Now, if we discover the reasons that it works, that's cool. We can learn about it and see how it works and why it happens, but it's just there. And the same thing works even for things like the law about don't kill. Why shouldn't we kill? It's because God told us we shouldn't. We should be preserving life. And it's wrong to violate that because God has established this as a rule. And if you violate that rule, things tend not to go very well for you. It's just the way it is. And it's that way with every one of the commandments. And this is helpful, and this is into like a morality, theological ethics kind of thing, but this is helpful. You need to realize this, that when you violate God's law, it's not as if God has to say, uh-oh, violator, I've got to punish him now. It just takes care of itself. The guy who's committing adultery is paying a price. It might not be immediate, but he's paying a price. And if any of you have ever dealt with a situation like that, you know what I'm talking about. The people in these situations pay a price. It's just built in. And it's no different than the guy who says, I don't care about the law of gravity. I'm going to defy it because I think that law is stupid. Well, feel free, defy it all you want. Just go ahead and jump off the roof, see what happens. You know, you can defy it, but it's going to take hold. And the same thing works with any law of morality. I'm going to defy the law of adultery. Feel free. What's going to happen? It'll take hold. You're going to get pulled down every time. Just the way it works, which is why the world's so messed up and broken. All right. So I think Pieper's right on the money here. Divine providence and sin. Now things get tougher. Everything's been easy so far. God's got his plan is working, the economy is all happening according to how God has established it, everything's cool. But now we have to ask the question about, all right, what about sin? What about evil? And now things get sticky. And these are the big issues. So now we got to be careful as we proceed. So Pieper tells us, bottom of 489, as to evil actions, Scripture in the first place tells us that God is unalterably opposed to them. Thou shalt have no other gods. Thou shalt not kill. So God is opposed to evil. That's pretty clear. Point 2, God often prevents their occurrence. So God does sometimes intervene and keep evil from happening and prevents it from happening. He'll do that from time to time. And then point 3, when evil does occur, even that evil will serve his good purpose, as for example when Joseph was sold into Egypt. Now we're getting into the smashing together of divine providence and divine foreordination and God's purposes being accomplished and the human responsibility and theodicy and trying to justify evil or theodicy. They start to run into each other here. Now here's the key. I think part of the key. There's probably lots of things going on, but here's one big part of this. So we'll take Joseph. He's a great example. So his brothers sell him off into Egypt, and off he goes. Horrible, terrible thing. But guess what? It's all good. Second in command of Egypt. His brilliance, they saves all of Egypt from starvation, saves his own people from starvation, and Israel is preserved because of Egypt being sold into slavery. So, now, does that mean the brothers' actions were okay? No. And that's the ticket. Just because God works something for good, it doesn't mitigate the evil of what happened, and it doesn't lessen the sin of what happened. So what his brothers did was wrong and sinful, regardless of the good that came of it. And even when Joseph says, you meant it for evil, God meant it for good, he says that in a way to comfort, but in a sense, they're still guilty, and they know it, which is why they feel the guilt they feel before him. And when you tell people it all worked out for the good, it doesn't lessen the guilt, because you know you did wrong. And so there's kind of two different things going on there. One is God's purpose is being accomplished, but the other is humanly I'm responsible and must own that responsibility. And the way I do that is by repenting, receiving forgiveness, and then trying to clear up whatever I can clear up. I'm responsible. They're both true. So providence does not negate or minimize human responsibility. And at the same time, providence is our comfort and our assurance that God's absolutely in control. And you, the wise caregiver of theological truth, will know when to say what to whatever situation, which is the beauty of doing the art of pastoral ministry and diaconal ministry. You got to know what to say, what not to say, when to say it. And it's not always easy, but you'll figure it out eventually. Okay, good? Now, what that means then is, 490, that God concurs in a sinful action. He does. So let's go with an example again. So we got a guy, let's go with Raskolnikov, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky. You guys enjoyed that one? Okay, we're hitting a few more of you on that one now. All right. I read that book twice. I read it when I was a freshman in college, and I hated it because I was just an idiot, 18 years old. What did I know? And we joked that it was the crime that it was written, and the punishment is that we have to read it. And I didn't appreciate it at all. But then I read it again here when I was at the SEM for my MDiv, when I had Rossau for Literature and the Gospel, and I loved it. So a few years does a lot to your appreciation for literature, and you grow up a little bit. But anyway, so in Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov, who is the wicked protagonist, in a sense, who gets redeemed, which is nice. I just ruined the story for you, but you'll probably know that. So he takes an axe, and he decides that he's going to be an Ubermensch and rise above contemporary morality, conventional morality, and he's going to do his own thing because he can do this. And he can use the money better than this wicked old landlord. So he kills the landlord. He has to kill her sister, too, who's a nice gal, but he does it anyway. One gets the front side of the axe, one gets the back side, but he whacks them off and kills them. All right. So Raskolnikov is literally an axe murderer. The question is, was God involved when he swung the axe? And what's the answer? Yes. He concurs according to the material aspect, Pieper says. So in other words, God was there providing the axe, providing the muscles, providing the knowledge of how to swing that axe, providing the air he needed. Everything he needed, Raskolnikov needed, was there from God. And even the motion of swinging that, God allows this. God is making this possible. Because if God were not present in sustaining Raskolnikov, what would happen? Gone. Yeah, everything collapses. God has to sustain everything, whether we know it or not. God is sustaining it all. So God is involved in the material aspect, but Pieper says he's not involved in the formal aspect. So in other words, the raw materials of an axe and the muscles and the ability, that's from God. But the action that is formed, in other words, taking a life, no, God's not responsible for that. So we make a distinction here between between the material and the formal. Now, hear Pieper on this. We are well aware that this distinction between the material and the formal peccati, in other words, the material of sin and the formal sin, does not remove, because peccati is just the word for sin, does not remove the difficulty our mind finds in this cooperation of God. Yeah, Pieper, duh, put it nicely. It does not remove the difficulty our minds find. In other words, this is rather perplexing. And this is what Pieper was getting at, that ultimately these solutions don't really solve the existential problem. Now, why couldn't God have stopped it? Yeah, so you see, you're not really solving a problem here. But we also know that for the present, during our life here on earth, we human beings must confine our thinking to the limits set by this distinction. So we have to be content with this. All explanations that go beyond these limits are based either on self-deception or on a denial of the two factors that enter in here. We've got to just leave the tension. All right, so then the point 4, we're flying along. Does God then permit men to sin? And the answer has to be yes. Yes, which again seems mystifying, but it's just what we've got to say. All right, Then we also have God concurring in good acts, so that God is working even through pagans when they're doing by nature things that are good and helpful, what we might call civil righteousness, and this is a good thing, and it's great. So God is active in even those things, even though they don't like it or maybe in spite of themselves, this is happening. All right, so now we get into the discussion about divine providence and free will. And here, Pieper really shines. So bottom of 491 into 492. The fact that men live, move, and have their being in God does not make them automata. They remain moral beings, free from coercion, that is, beings personally responsible to God, or in other words, persons. So you see where Pieper goes with this, to the responsibility part. And that's where I think it needs to go as well. It's the teaching of Scripture. It's also the teaching of experience, because man's conscience bears out his responsibility. The fact that we feel that sense of guilt means that we know we're responsible. The responsibility of man, his freedom from coercion, is a fact. How these facts agree with the fact that God works all things, we do not know. And again, see, Pieper says it with an economy of words. He just has a paragraph and he's done with it. Plaker spends a book exploring this whole thing and trying to unpack it and getting into all this. And Plaker is helpful because we're curious about this, and more curious than Pieper gives us credit for probably. But Pieper's saying the same exact thing Plaker's saying, but just boom, done. It's just that's the way it is. How this works, we do not know. And he's done. That's it. So the next paragraph sounds like something right out of Plaker. In this connection, the special question comes up for consideration. Must all events in the world occur just as they do occur, or could they happen otherwise? Scripture compels us to maintain both the necessity and the contingency. From the viewpoint of the divine providence, the necessity obtains. From the human viewpoint, the contingency. In other words, two realities, both fully at work, both contemporarily happening, but they're not ruling each other out. No zero-sum game. That's exactly what he's up to here. All right, good. Now, he makes a nice contrast here. This is just very helpful for your thinking between an Epicurean way of thinking about things and a Stoic way of looking at things. And this is interesting because Odin makes much the same distinction when he's got in his book a list of like eight or nine different objections to providence. And he starts at the one end with complete wild free will, and at the other end he ends with complete bound will. And that's exactly what's going on here, because Epicureanism is completely atheistic and denies any responsibility or any accountability. An Epicurean would say, you live and you die, and that's it. And so live the happiest, most fulfilling, pleasurable life you can. That's the point. So there's no responsibility. So here you have complete and total free will. Stoicism, which was just ahead of Christianity, became a full-blown Roman philosophy. Stoicism takes the other view. Stoicism said that everything is fixed and is fated, and it's what we would call radical determinism. So by determinism we mean it's been set, it's in place, no question about it, no choice. Determinism. So it's all fated and it's all fixed. Everything is fixed and you can't change it. Jesus Christ Superstar. How many know that one? Oh, a few of you. That's good. There's some hope. All right. Awesome album. Best Weber and Rice ever did. Anyway, so we have the two extremes. On the one hand, you have free will, do your own thing. On the other hand, you have, it's just that we're all fated. And both of these are making the same error. And the error is the zero-sum game. Because for the Epicurean error, there's no God, it's all us. For the Stoic error, it's all fate, and we just have to just kind of go along, do the best you can with what you've been fated to have. No options, no outs. And both of these are going to be wrong. So Pieper writes this, bottom 292. It is necessary to teach both of these scriptural truths, the necessity and the contingency, in order to safeguard the Christian religion against Epicureanism and atheism, things happen without God by chance, on the one hand, and fatalism and Stoicism, disregard of the divinely ordered means, on the other. The following rule of life must be observed. We should in all our ways, in the kingdom of power and of grace, diligently make use of the means which God supplies. The kingdom of power means the world. The kingdom of grace is coram Deo. In sickness, for example, we call on the doctor and the nurse. And in seeking salvation, we make use of the means of grace through which God creates and sustains faith. It is a foolish undertaking to attempt to penetrate the divine providence a priori while setting aside the God-appointed means. We should be entering a domain which is beyond the reach of our present understanding. Shall the creature make bold to explore God in his bare majesty? No, we take him as he comes. So, secondary causes, God working through means, teaches us that when you're sick, you call the doctor. Now, Christians still wrestle with this. Because you'll get people sometimes who will say, well, I'm done with this therapy. I'm not going to do it anymore. If God wants to heal me, He's going to have to heal me. But, in fact, God healing you and God's will to heal you could be happening through these secondary means, and we should not be discounting those. Now, there might be good reasons why you'd say, we're not going to pursue this medical therapy anymore, but don't do it because God will just go ahead and heal me anyway. That's not your reason for doing it. There might be other good reasons, but not that one. All right, and the last discussion is this whole idea about your terminus vitae, which just means what? End of life. Has your last day been set? Yes. God already knows it. Has to be. It's the whole part of providence. If we're having this plan that God's working out, He knows when you die. It's His choice. You die at His will. But death isn't His plan. Right. So why does He will me to die? That's the contingent will. So all these issues here. But it's already set. So that means it doesn't matter what I eat, how I drive, what kind of reckless behavior I engage in, because it's already set. Well, yeah, see, we're back to the tension again. So while it's true that your end of life has been set, it's also true that you're responsible for how you live and how you eat and how you behave, and that you don't live in a reckless way or in a way that tempts God. That's wrong, but at the same time, God has chosen it, and that's the way it is. It's both things at once. Joel.
So basically, my choice to eat well would improve my quality of life while I'm here.
It
but
might.
I'm still going to die.
You're still going to die, and I don't know if it's going to improve your quality of life or not, because spinach gets really old after a while.
Well, okay.
No, you know, see what I mean? These are relative. Someone else might say, hey, my quality of life is a whole lot better. I eat steak when I want. That's my quality of life. Yeah, see? But see, the point is, you're confusing two things. And to say, I'm going to die when I'm going to die, so I'm going to go ahead and have my 4-pack-a-day habit. It doesn't matter. Well, you're also knowing that's a waste of money and it's bad stewardship. So you have a responsibility with stewardship regardless your terminus vitae. I guess my real argument would be, I don't care when you're going to die, you're still responsible to God to be a good guardian and good caretaker of what He's given you. So you eat well, not just so you'll live longer, you eat well because that's what you should do. And that's the attitude I have. So I eat my spinach and smile, even though I'd much rather have iceberg lettuce. But I've been told spinach is much healthier. Iceberg's like eating water. But spinach is full of stuff that's really good for you. It just doesn't taste as good. Anyway. All right. Anything else on Pieper?
Ask a quick question about the terminus vitae.
Yeah.
Would secondary causes play into that too, where we'd say you smoke 4 packs a day, secondary causes,
Yep.
you die.
Absolutely.
It's part of the terminus vitae.
Absolutely.
So they are related in a sense.
See, but they're related, but it's more like, and it's just this interface again, because your responsibility, and so you died. Yeah, but that was still God's plan. Yeah, and if it's God's plan, well, He's going to make it happen, and He makes it happen because you're a 4-pack a habit a day. 4-pack a day habit. 4-pack a habit. Yeah. 4-pack a day habit. Yeah. What's that? 4 packs? Yeah, I've known 5-pack a day people. Yeah, it's like end to end. Yeah. No, well, see, I grew up in a different era when people, that was much more common. And there were people I knew who would actually, I've seen it happen. They have a cigarette and they light the one from the next, and yeah. Oh yeah. That's really chain smoking. Yeah. All right. Well, the first cigarettes before they even get out of bed. Yeah. They wake up and they light up. Yeah. All right. You guys live in this sanitized era. You don't even know what it was like. You know what it's like to sit in the back of the airplane and choke. And you just try to get in the front of the airplane so you could be enough rows in front of the smoking section. That's what I'm talking about. So you don't even know what that was anymore. Now it's all squeaky clean air, but it didn't used to be that way. And it didn't matter how were you on the plane, you'd always smell it. And if you happen to be one row in front of the smoking section, oh man. But anyway, I digress.
As soon as he took off.
Oh, well no, it's only when the light went boom, and it's like, and you just, the cloud, because they were all nervous. They had to have their nicotine. It had been about 45 minutes probably at least, and so they had to have it. I'm sorry, I shouldn't make fun. All right. Odin, we don't have time to go through it piece by piece. What are your highlights? What do you want to ask about? What are the things that stand out to you? Yes, Nathan.
It's reactionary God nonsense. I mean,
Okay.
I know that there's precedent for that in the Christian tradition. Athanasius kind of talks that way.
Yes.
But it just seems so patently, Jesus is like plan B.
Yeah.
And what seems like once you put it that way, that should be a red light.
Oh, it should be. It should be. I mean, I don't know how he can even write this, and that's almost at the end of the reading, so you had to get through a lot to get there. But here it is, page 306. If Eden is plan A and Eden does not work out, I can't even believe he even writes that. Due to the self-determining volatility, well, see, there's the reason. Self-determining volatility, frailty, and fallibility of human freedom. That's why he's got to say it. Then God has a plan B and a plan C. Come on, you got to be kidding me. What kind of God are you left with here? And that's exactly the issue. I couldn't agree with you more. To me, that's the absolute most glaring weakness of this whole entire discussion, but it filters all over the place. And see, that's the other thing, too, with a free will Baptist. You need to realize that this whole discussion, this should be becoming clear to you by now. Free will is not some little kind of small doctrine let's argue about. It becomes just central. And you should see how important this is. When you get some part of doctrine wrong, it infects everything. It just ripples. Everything gets touched by it. Everything. And you got to be able to recognize that.
I was just going to say with the Baptist colonialism and all of that, and the belief that Israel gets a second chance on it. I mean, that all goes down to this plan A, B, and C.
It starts too, yes. It all plays into that. And you also see a real heavy dose of the free will tradition in that whole line of thinking. Joel?
So that statement you just made kind of clarifies something, because I always wondered why you had this guy Erasmus who was kind of very influential.
Oh, sharp guy.
Church,
yeah.
But he stood so vehemently, like Luther and him, like butted heads just over free will, and I'm like, why? It seems like you guys had such similar goals. So you're
right.
saying that they both realized that so much rested on.
Exactly. This is why in the Bondage of the Will, Luther says, forget the Latin exact phrase, but you have me by the throat. And so for Luther, this was the critical, vital issue. And to let free will slide, and he was encouraged by many people to let it go, for exactly your reason. Let's just get along. And Luther said, I can't, because everything hangs in the balance here, and you're ruining it all. It's huge. It's huge. And we have this tendency to kind of trivialize theology, like it's a kind of arcane theological debate. No, this is big time stuff. It matters. It matters. All right. Yeah.
I did like about Odin the fact how he put it into a parental.
That was really useful.
I could see myself. Here's my kitchen. Here's
Yep.
my little kids, and I'm in control. But
yes.
They're doing their thing, and I'm allowing it or disallowing it.
I agree. Now, there are some good things in Odin, so let's hit the good things with the time we have left here, all right? So he talks about how there's kind of these three levels. You can talk about how God is upholding creation. This is page 270, 271. Cooperating, the secondary causes, and then guiding. So everything is being God intervenes when he needs to, and he cooperates and he upholds. So you just have this sense of God upholding the creation. We live and move and breathe because God allows it, even if we don't pay attention. And then God works through secondary causes, and cooperation between God and creation is going on. And then sometimes God actually guides, where he will pull the voting levers and get the right guy elected, or stop the car so it doesn't go over the cliff. And we haven't talked about angels yet, but this stuff happens. So does God intervene and things that are bad don't happen? Yeah. I bet every one of you in the room has a inches story. Wow, 1 inch different, or 1 second would have made all the difference. Almost every one of us has a story like that. And we can attribute that to coincidence, but I'm more and more convinced that this is God intervening. And the very fact that a kid can grow up running around a farm in Nebraska and not die is God's intervening providence. I did some crazy things as a kid. Not on a farm, but just in rural Nebraska. My two younger brothers and I, we had bows and arrows, which was a delight. We loved our bows and arrows, but we played with those things like crazy. And one of our favorite things was taking our arrows and shooting them straight up and watching them come, how cool was that? We did crazy stuff. And no one got killed. No one even lost an eye, and we came out relatively untouched. It was pretty remarkable. So that's providence. God is guiding things. God is absolutely guiding things. All right, good. Another really nice point he makes in here is just tying this to the economy. This is page 273, 74. He's exactly right to make this connection. We already talked about that. Really strong point. All right, 277, opposing views. And he ticks off 8 contemporary philosophies. Some ancient philosophies, some still around, but they're all very real. And all these oppose a good teaching of providence. Now let's think about these real quick. Pantheism. What's pantheism teach? That God is everything. Everything is God. Providence is gone. because God's not outside of it, he's just part of it all. So it completely eradicates providence. Then we have the idea of deism. We already talked about that. No providence because God won't touch. Then we have dualism. Star Wars, dark side of the force, light, good, bad, back and forth, the Manichaean thing. And you guys have all seen the yin and the yang, right? Familiar with that symbol? All right. Recognize it? Teenagers wear around their necks. Think it's really cool. It means balance. Well, it actually means yin and yang. And it's a Manichaean heresy. So don't you little teeny boppers wear it to confirmation class. Rip it off their neck. So that's dualism. And dualism violates providence because in dualism, you never know what's going to come out on top. And what we are confessing is, no, Satan is beat. The game's fixed. Okay, indeterminism. Indeterminism, nothing's happening, no control. Indeterminism, the other side, it's all fixed. Those are both wrong as well. Then we have the idea of the omnicausality. That's playing a zero-sum game, that God just makes it all happen. Then we have pure chance, that's wrong. And then the sense of fate. Now, obviously, a lot of these start to overlap. I don't know what the difference between determinism and fate really is. They're kind of the same thing. But you get these, essentially, two extremes. Epicurean extreme or a Stoic extreme. And this is the idea of complete free will, and it's pure chance. There is nothing directing anything. And so we just do what we want to do. And over here, everything is fated and fixed, and there is nothing is possible. So those are the two extremes, and they're both wrong. All right, good. The other couple of other highlights, the parenting thing. I'm trying to remember what page that was. Somebody has that. He does point out there are no zero-sum games, and he gets that, but then he kind of stumbles other places. 288. He does a nice job about talking about this caring that God has for all of creation, and he sets up this kind of concentric rings. So does God sustain the mountain and the rocks? Yes. And then the plant life? Yes. And then animal life? Yes. And then human life? Yeah. And so you kind of get greater sense of care as you go out. And he's talking about that 288. You have lifeless matter, living plants, animals, humans. And so we have these levels of care and these levels of dependence as we grow out, and God is watching over every bit of it. It all matters to him. He cares. So he even cares about the rock formation that the scout leader tipped over and caused a big stink in the media. Yeah. And everybody was like scandalized. He just destroyed a 1,000,000-year-old formation. Oh, whatever. Anyway, but he cares. God is concerned about it all.